Stark Publishing presents Taste of Darkness. Written by Mark Leslie, narrated by Chris Humphreys. Dale Johnson was immediately enveloped by the darkness. Merely one step into the room, he turned to look at the doorway he had just entered, but could not see it. The annoying muzak which had been playing in the hallway began to fade as well, as if someone was turning down the volume. Mr. Jacks had been right. It was as if he was no longer inside the newly renovated health club, but instead in some other dimension, completely removed from the natural world. His senses surrendered to the darkness, leaving him first with no sight, then no sound. As he continued to stand there, his sense of touch began to dull, as if under a slow-working anesthetic, and he could no longer smell the fresh paint from the hallway. The only sense which apparently remained was taste. Mr. Jacks had promised it would be an incredible sensation when the only thing you could experience was the bitter-sweet taste of darkness. This was perfect. It was an excellent place to meditate on life's problems and decisions. More clearly than he was usually able to, Dale began to think about the promotion he had applied for. The circumstances of his workplace floating calmly through his mind, he felt right about the promotion. He was the most experienced, hardest-working employee in the department, able to motivate and train fellow co-workers. There was no way the position of department manager could not be his. And in the back of his mind, the thought that the promotion of the single black man in the department could be construed by his colleagues as affirmative action also faded. Any negative spark he might have had about the situation seemed to be smothered in the calming blanket of darkness. Dale shuddered and stepped toward where the doorway should be. He passed through it and stood in the hallway again, the darkness sliding off him like so much shed skin, revealing the light, the pervading smell of fresh paint, and the saccharine sweet sound of muzak. Mr. Jacks stepped out from the office across the hall, his bushy eyebrows raised high on his forehead. His lips, pursed, were obscured by his thick moustache. Give him a larger nose and a pair of thick glasses, Dale quickly realized, and you'd think he was wearing one of those novelty shop disguises. But despite his small stature, almost a foot shorter than Dale Johnson, and his Groucho Marx features, there was something respectful about him. Dale assumed it was the reservedness with which he spoke. "Well," Mr. Jacks said. "This room is perfect," Dale said, feeling a sudden rumbling in his stomach. "It's better than any sensory deprivation tank I've ever been in. How much?" Mr. Jacks smiled, an ugly grin that managed to peek out from under his moustache. "It's already paid for." "What?" But there was no response. Mr. Jacks simply turned on the spot and went back into the office. The office door quietly closed behind him, and Dale was left with the muzak and the paint, and the gentle moan of his stomach. Sitting in the deserted Jack's Health Club cafeteria, Dale crunched down the tasteless tofu burger, then sipped at the bland orange juice. Either the food was off, because this was the first day that the club was open for business, or he was coming down with a cold. None of the food he'd had for lunch could curb his appetite or affect his taste buds, never mind please them. And what was it that Mr. Jacks meant about it already being paid for? He was certain that the sensory deprivation room was not part of his membership fees at the club. It was listed nowhere on the brochures, and Mr. Jacks specifically said, before he even began his tour of the facilities, that there would be an extra charge to use any of the areas other than the pool, the showers, the weight room, and the exercise machines. So how, then, could Dale's use of the sensory deprivation room be paid for? Would Mr. Jacks simply add it to the bill and withdraw it out of his account along with the regular monthly membership fee? Probably. But there was something about the way he'd smiled that disturbed Dale. He finished his lunch, swiped at his face with the napkin, and made his way toward the locker room. Mr. Jacks had provided him with a key and a locker number. Before he left, he might as well have a look at where it was. On his way to the locker room, he glanced at a clock on the wall and did a double take. He looked at his watch. It was 3:15. But that's impossible, he thought. He had come to this facility at shortly after 10 that morning. It had taken him maybe half an hour to tour the facility, perhaps 15 minutes to order and eat lunch, and he'd spent only 5 or so minutes in the isolation room. Hadn't he? Perhaps he'd stayed in the isolation room longer than he was aware. It sometimes happened, and it would account for the intense hunger he'd felt. After all, he'd skipped breakfast and had been overdue for lunch for a couple of hours. As Dale had experienced before, long bouts of sensory deprivation sometimes resulted in hallucinatory perceptions and a disassociation with the passage of time. Wait a second. 3:15. He was supposed to have heard about his promotion by now. By showing up this late at work, there was no chance of this promotion now. His boss had probably been frantically searching for him all afternoon. His hour-long excursion away from the office had lasted half of the day. Oh boy. Dale thumbed open his cell phone to check his voicemail. The air suddenly took on a sweet aftertaste. It's happening again, Robert Jacks muttered, feeling the orgasm-like sensations begin to flood through his body in tiny waves. Another one joins. Every newcomer always brought such sweet pleasure. He moaned, trying to find the chair as his knees weakened. Then came the distinct char-broiled taste of a hamburger covered in mozzarella cheese with pickles and onions and a dab of honey mustard. He moaned again, running his hands along his stomach and chest. The acidy sweetness of an orange rang through his tongue. Oh. I guess I'm starting to catch a cold, Dale said, putting down his champagne glass. I can't even taste this at all. Oh, trust me, Dad, Linda said. It's excellent. He smiled at his only daughter, who, with a gentle face framed in small black curls, was becoming almost the mirror image of her mother. I'm glad you approve. Well, thanks for bringing me here with you and Mom. I really needed this break from studying for my finals. His face flushed as he was reminded about how dedicated Linda was to her education. Any time, Pumpkin. Linda blushed. I wished you wouldn't call me that. I'm a grown woman, Dad. Ah, you've been my pumpkin for 25 years now. You'll always be my little pumpkin. Yes, I guess I am. Linda looked at the people at the adjacent table. Just not so loud, okay? When I'm a doctor, I don't want people to be calling me Dr. Pumpkin. Pam returned to the table from the washroom, a playful glimmer in her eyes. Is he calling you Pumpkin again? Linda nodded sheepishly. Guilty as charged, Dale said. Well, now that your father has had his turn embarrassing you, maybe this would be a good time to talk to him about, you know. Dale looked at his daughter, his eyebrows lifted high. I was hoping to get myself a car. A car? Yeah, well, I've been looking at this Impala for the past couple of weeks. And how are you going to pay for it? With money, Dad. With what money? With borrowed money. Dale turned to Pam and winked so that his daughter couldn't see. Honey, you're in med school. I don't think the bank will lend a student the kind of money you need to buy a car. Dad! Linda rolled her eyes. Oh, sweetheart, Pam said. Your father is just teasing you. Moving his hand over his daughter's hair, Dale said, We'll see what we can do, okay, Pumpkin? I'm not sure how much of a raise it is that I'm getting, but I'm sure that your mother and I will be able to manage something. Robert Jacks rolled his tongue across his lips. Fine champagne, the finest he'd ever tasted. Then steak, cooked medium rare and smothered with onions and mushrooms. Baked potato covered in sour cream and bits of bacon. Real bacon, not chips of simulated bacon flavor. Steamed clams, orange crush, hamburger, cheese and macaroni, peanut butter and strawberry jam on whole wheat bread. The hot bite of cheap whiskey. Supper time was always the most difficult and the most satisfying. There was no accounting for some tastes, but with a little effort he could focus in on the right ones, the good ones. He concentrated, had to block out the countless other sensations, focus on the good ones, the rich ones, the satisfying ones. Ah, there it was. Champagne. And another. Chocolate mousse. Getting out of the office early on Friday wasn't a problem, especially now that Dale was the one in charge of letting everyone go. There was a junior division baseball game that evening, and quite a few of the office staff had tickets for it. Being in a good mood because of his promotion and wanting to leave early himself, Dale gladly dismissed everyone 2 hours before their shifts ended. But the worry that the added responsibility brought him had still been enough to tie his shoulder muscles into tense knots. And then there was the fact that, despite his promise to Linda, buying the car just wasn't possible. No matter how he and Pam had crunched the numbers, the money needed was simply not there, at least not for the next 6 months, until they got on top of their bill payments. By the time Dale was sinking into the sensory deprivation room at Jack's health club, he felt he needed it twice as badly as the last time he'd used it. Like before, the darkness enveloped his sight immediately, the muzak faded to silence, and he was barely aware of the floor beneath his feet when he realized his sense of smell was already gone. As before, he was left with the taste of darkness. He rolled the pleasure of its light, bitter sweetness around on his tongue like some forbidden fruit. The taste was fleeting, yet powerful. Like a shadow visible only in peripheral vision. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone. He relished in the sheer primordial experience of it. Linda's car, he thought, as the taste of the dark played over his taste buds. How could we get Linda's car for her? His mind carefully considered all the steps that he and Pam had taken to work out a car payment funding. Slowly, his mind reeled over the dilemma, until finally it became nothing more than another thought, stirring no emotion, no worry, no fear, no tension. It was simply a fact, and facts could be dealt with. Things would work out. The bittersweet taste of the dark ensured that it would. "I'm whipping up some bacon and eggs for Linda," Pam said as Dale entered the kitchen. "Would you like me to make some extra for you?" "No, thanks. Linda's here?" "Yeah, she was in the neighborhood after the buses stopped running last night, so she crashed here instead of walking back to the dorm." Dale pictured his daughter walking across the city in the middle of the night, alone and vulnerable. Within his imagination, at every corner, within every shadow, lurked some perverted maniac with a knife and a repressed hatred for young, beautiful women. "Everywhere I look, I'm reminded about how much more sense it makes that she should have a car. Anything could happen to her while walking home from the bus stop at night." "I know, but we already tried to work something out." "That doesn't make it any easier. Have you told her yet?" "No, I thought we'd do it together." Dale kissed the back of Pam's neck while reaching over her shoulder to grasp a strip of bacon from a plate between the elements of the stovetop. She turned to kiss his cheek while he devoured the crispy strip. "I thought the smell of bacon frying would have you stampeding down here like wildfire. You sure you don't want some?" Dale frowned. He hadn't actually smelled the bacon frying, and it tasted bland. "No, thanks. I'm not that hungry." He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. Pam walked over to feel his forehead. "You feeling okay?" "I think the bug that I picked up is getting worse," he said, sipping the coffee without really being able to taste it. Not only does everything taste funny, but I can't seem to smell anything either. You don't sound stuffed up. No, I'm not. It's strange. Last week, my sense of taste seemed dull, but I could at least smell the things I was eating. And now, I can't smell anything. I never realized how much of what we taste actually comes from smelling the food. He put the coffee down. I've never had such a lifeless cup of coffee in my whole life. Well, thanks very much, Dad, Linda said, walking into the kitchen. You used to like the way I made coffee. Pumpkin! Dale's frown dissolved into a grin. Linda kissed her father on the forehead as she dropped into the chair beside him. She threw a small stack of envelopes and flyers onto the table. By the way, the mail's here. Dale smiled at Linda. Thanks. And by the way, I'm sure the coffee is just fine. Dad has a pretty nasty cold or flu. We're not sure. I can't taste or smell anything. Otherwise, I feel fine. He fumbled through the envelopes, but one stuck out. Something official-looking from Visa. Pam, didn't we pay our Visa bill last week? Of course. Pam wiped her hands on the dish rag and reached for the envelope. Why? Did they send us something? Yep. She tore the envelope open with her thumb, pulled out the letter, and started to read it aloud. Dear Mr. Johnson, we are delighted to inform you that you are one of 12 winners selected in our Buy and Win promotion. She paused, reading the rest in silence. I don't believe it. She brought the letter up to her nose and read the rest of the letter in silence. Her eyes shifted back and forth at a rate that was almost humorous. What? Dale asked, beginning to get up. What is it, Mum? Pam dropped the letter on the table. Congratulations, Linda. You're the proud owner of a brand new Chevrolet Impala. Robert Jacks woke to the unmistakable smell of frying bacon and freshly brewed coffee. The sensation hit him with an alarmingly refreshing jolt of pure pleasure. He rolled across the bed and moaned in pleasure. With every newcomer, with every sensation, the effect it had was not only increasingly addictive, it was logarithmic in intensity. He orgasmed as the rush of sensations flooded in. Welcome back to Earth, Gale said. Dale looked up at her and realized for the first time that she must have been standing beside his desk for a few minutes already. Oh, hi, Gale. Is anything wrong? You seem distracted all week. We're kind of worried about you. Dale fidgeted with his pen, considering revealing to her the strange things he had been mulling over, then gingerly placed the pen down on his desk and forced a smile. Honest, Gale, it's nothing, just this cold that I can't seem to shake. It has me a little on edge, is all. I haven't been grumpy all week, have I? No, just distracted. You sure you're okay? Dale nodded. Besides this cold, I've never been better, and that's the truth. He surveyed the office and noticed that everyone else was gone. He glanced at his watch. It was a few minutes shy of 6 p.m. It looks like the weekend has already started. Why don't you start enjoying it? Sure. Gale began to make her way to the door. And Gale, she paused, turning. Thanks for the concern. She smiled and nodded, then walked out the door, leaving Dale to speculate about the events of the past couple of weeks. He couldn't help but wonder about the sensory deprivation room. He'd joined the new health club because he needed a place to unwind after a hard day at work. The sensory deprivation room had been an added bonus, providing him with a place to meditate about his worries and problems. And so far, every problem that he'd brought into the room had been solved in some way. The promotion he could see as a coincidence because it was something he'd been working at all along, something he had earned. But the Impala? He couldn't ignore that. It was difficult to believe that he and Pam had inadvertently won a brand new car through the credit card company simply by charging more than $500 on it and being automatically entered in a contest. Not only was it a new car, but it was the exact model that Linda had been hoping for. The coincidence was too convenient to ignore. Something had to be going on. But what? Slowly, Dale got up from the desk, deciding it was time to pay Mr. Jacks another visit and perhaps get some answers. 12 more clients signed on today, Robert Jacks whispered, pacing across the office of his health club, making it 50 this week. 50. A grin shot up his face, and he struggled with the incoming scents and tastes. Fixing his jaw tight, he pushed them out. He had to keep them out for at least a few minutes. He had to be allowed a few moments to think, instead of just feel, just sense. If the sensation with just 3 clients was great before, he was about to reach an ecstasy like one he'd never felt before. And that was merely the beginning. Because once they discovered the power of the room, they got greedy. They wanted more. They would trade anything for what they desired. And the deeper they traded, the more heightened each acquired sense became. Just before the sensations overpowered his concentration, Robert Jacks thought about what it would be like to feel, taste, smell, hear, and see through every single client. It was just a matter of time, just a matter of recurring visits. Dale's cell phone rang just as he reached the office door. "Hello? Dale?" Even though it was strained and weak, he recognized his wife's voice. "Pam, what's wrong? What's happened?" "I'm so scared, Dale." "What happened, hon? Just tell me what happened." "There was an accident." Turning away from the bed, Dale buried his face between Pam's neck and shoulder. He could no longer stand to look at the twisted body of his daughter, at the tubes and needles that ran amok about her, at the deep, dark circles around eyes that stared back at him, empty. "Pumpkin!" Dale could barely choke out the word. "She'll be okay," Pam said. "The doctor says that there's still a chance she could come out of it." That's not enough, Dale thought. That's just not enough. Linda was trapped in a hell worse than death. Even though he no longer looked at her, he could still see her lying as if prisoner to the bed and the machines that kept her alive, still hear the machine that forced air in and out of her lungs in asthmatic-sounding breaths, and the digital beep of her heartbeat, keeping the beat to the horrific tune of life support. "This can't be happening," Dale said, his words hitching as he cried. Pam's arms came around him as he wept. He was barely aware of the soothing pattern his wife's hands made as they rubbed along his back. For an obscure second, the distant feel of Pam's hands reminded him of another place, another time, another possibility. The feeling of what it was like to lose the very sense of touch. And suddenly it became clear. The whole twisted notion made sense. He sacrificed his sense of taste and received a promotion. He gave up his sense of smell and in return was awarded a new car. It wasn't crazy. It wasn't stupid. It was the most logical thing that could happen. Perhaps that was what Mr. Jacks meant when he said his visit to the room had already been paid for. He was paying for each visit and resolution with the loss of a sense. "You scratch my back, and I'll scratch yours," Dale whispered. The ultimate deal. "What's that?" Pam asked. Dale didn't answer. Teary-eyed, he looked up at his wife and smiled. There was hope after all. Mr. Jacks was about to have his back scratched in spades. This time it felt like the flood would never stop. Robert Jacks could do nothing but roll about on the floor and let the sensations consume him. They had to work their way through his mind, through his very soul, and then, maybe then, he would attempt to control them again. But in the meantime, he was too busy enjoying the ecstasy. He'd never experienced multiple orgasms before. Dale stepped into the room, and, like the times before, welcomed the darkness as it enveloped his senses one by one. But, unlike the times before, as his 5 senses were enveloped in darkness, he was aware of the power that flowed through that darkness, the power that was the unknown sense, that other sense the room allowed him to tap into, the sense of the foundation of the universe, the sense that could manipulate the fabric of reality. And this time, he was prepared to give anything, prepared to make any sacrifice for the life of his daughter. Dale's first visit to the room had taken a few hours, the second visit twice as long. This time, Dale was prepared to stay forever, trade his entire being, if that was what was required. He thought about his daughter, body twisted and pinned to the bed like some insect that was under study. Her every vital sign was displayed for the entire room to see. Her body was vulnerable to the whim of anyone who came along. And her eyes, they stared out into nothing. No, not nothing. The darkness. They stared into the very realm of darkness that enveloped Dale. He concentrated on Linda, searched through the darkness until he found where she was looking. Her eyes, void of the very life, the utter sunshine that used to radiate from them, were empty, staring into the darkness and seeking death. Dale was able to grab her focus, manipulate it. Linda had to live. She had to survive. She was better than this even that had occurred, stronger than this damage that had been done to her body. She would endure and emerge victorious. As his mind whirled, orbited around his daughter's consciousness and the intense power of the dark, the feeling that there was a floor beneath him began to dissolve completely. Something pulled at him, at his very soul, and his body went with it. He spun through the darkness, somehow aware that he was moving at a breakneck speed. Something else pulled at him, snapped him back the way he had come. Then again. It was like a fishing line pulling at him, but not wanting the entire weight of him, only wanting to select a piece of him. He wouldn't have any of it, forcing himself, giving himself entirely to the darkness. He was pulled forward and snapped back more, again and again. The repeated back and forth struggle took everything in him to stay focused on his single pursuit and desire. An eternity seemed to pass as his will battled with the powers of the dark. In time, the sense of time actually passing was gone. There was only his spirit and the darkness, engaged in an endless seesaw struggle. He floated on, aware only that his senses had been snatched from his body. And then there was nothing. Nothing but Linda. Nothing but a glimmer of life in her eyes, a twitch of her lips as she croaked out a desire for water. Dale felt himself finally dissipate into the darkness, become one with it, secure in the knowledge that his daughter would be all right. The power needed to see his goal completed seemed to have taken more than his senses. It required the absorption of his entire being. He let it happen. Molecule by molecule, he allowed himself to be given up to the darkness. Then, a great sensation of brightness struck. He was blinded by it, but somehow also deafened and burnt. In an obscure way, he could smell and taste the intensity of the brightness. And then there was nothing again. His mind reeled, and he was aware of the floor again, aware that he was falling over. The floor rushed up and struck the side of his head. He let out a moan that was consumed by the darkness around him. Stumbling to his feet, he began to run, unsure of why he was running, of where he was running to. Then he ran into something solid and lost consciousness. A strange moaning sound invaded Dale's ears. He rolled over, feeling as if his body were one giant bruise. There was a faint smell of fresh paint, and the stale air had never tasted so joyous. Slowly, Dale cracked open his eyes to find himself in the unlit, darkened hallway of Jack's health club. He turned to see that the sensory deprivation room no longer existed. There was a plain, solid wall there, no darkened entrance. He got to his feet and listened. The moaning came from the other side of Mr. Jack's closed office door. The moaning was muffled, but it wasn't just because it came from the other side of a door. It was as if a wad of cotton were stuffed in Dale's ears. As he looked up, he realized that the lights in the hallway were on. It just seemed like all the 60-watt bulbs had been replaced by 10-watt bulbs. He had all his senses back, but they seemed to be muted, damaged. But along with that loss came the experience of another sense. The one he'd experienced in the darkness, the one that had allowed him to sense the fabric of reality and to manipulate it. With that sense, he was able to determine that Jax had tapped into the power of the darkness and been using it, and the average person's selfish desires to negotiate a metaphysical trade and ultimately covet senses from his clients. The moaning from the office became static and turned into a high-pitched wail. Dale opened the door to see Mr. Jax lying on the floor, his entire body quivering as if he were trapped in an eternal epileptic seizure. The wail changed back into a moan, then converted into a repeated babble, from which Dale could make out only two words. Too much. Somewhere, some place in the back of his mind, the dark sense allowed Dale to understand what had happened. When Dale had forced the trade of all the rest of his senses too quickly, Jax was forced to deal with more powerful sensations at once than his mind could handle. Jack's ultimate voyeuristic, vicarious experiences were finally over. Like a computer that ran out of system resources, Jax had been unable to handle any more input, overloaded, and crashed. Leaving the man to his over-sensed hell, Dale left the office. He would deal with his newly acquired sense later. His only concern for the moment was to get back to the hospital and welcome his pumpkin back to the world of the living.
Behind the Screams. Hello, this is Mark Leslie. One of the things I still get plenty of comments from, both in reviews as well as in the emails sent to me from readers, is that they enjoy the behind-the-story notes that I add to my short stories. And so, presented here are a few insights and some background information, either on the inspiration or source for each story. Now, if you're not a person who enjoys watching the special features on a DVD or the movie, along with commentary from the actors or director, then I suggest you simply skip this chapter. Thanks for listening. If, however, you do enjoy that behind-the-curtains peek into my fiction, into my writing, then you and I still have a bit of time left on our walk together. Let me share with you some further background and insights about Taste of Darkness. I have always been fascinated by sensory deprivation tanks. I've never been in one. Let's blame the mild claustrophobia, shall we? But the concept of being in an environment where you can't see or hear anything strikes me as a little bit disconcerting. As I consider the idea of one's senses seeming to disappear, I imagined a totally pure sensory deprivation environment, one where not just your sense of sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste are muted, but they actually disappear. They flee from you. Wondering about that made me wonder where the senses might be going to when they disappear. And that's where Mr. Jax comes in. along with another concept that has long kicked around in the back of my mind. The concept of sanity and what sanity means has long interested me, likely starting from my enjoyment of reading Hamlet back in high school. As the young prince explores and questions his own sanity, I became intrigued with what sanity was and what insanity was as well. I remember writing down in a notebook, the way I often jot down single lines or concepts that capture my attention, around the time I was enjoying Hamlet, wrote something like this. What if insanity isn't the lack of sane thought, but merely a side effect of too much thought? I enjoyed the too much thought concept, or at least the basic element of too much. And that's where the idea of how Jax might react to being overloaded came to me. This was long before the concept of mania or the upswing of bipolar disorder, manic depression was well known or understood. And the concept to me might be that in a manic state, in that overactive consumption of so much stimuli, perhaps that is one of the ways that insanity can strike. Like a battery that is overloaded, well beyond the normal charge it can hold. And so, I wanted to explore that idea. With Mr. Jax, I wanted to explore ideas surrounding vicarious experiences and taking that to the extreme. And though I wrote the original version of this story well before social media was as big as it is, the idea that it reflects upon a vicarious element is interesting. I also had to push Dale into a state where he wasn't just willingly giving up his senses over to the darkness that allowed Jax to consume them, but that he very forcefully thrust his senses out and into that darkness, that he committed a complete and unabashed sacrifice of himself for his daughter. In the original version of the story, in his desire to save his daughter, Dale gives up his life, falls completely at prey to the darkness, losing not just the senses, but his very life and essence itself. But he knows his daughter will be fine, and he knows that Jax is ultimately suffering. And while I did appreciate that concept in the original draft, I wanted Dale to be able to know for sure that his pumpkin was okay, that she was going to get out of it. So I switched up the ending to give the reader more of a sense of that positive, uplifting feeling. And I did feel good about allowing Dale to come out a little scarred and knowing the mistakes he had made which had led to the tragedy in the first place, but ensuring that it wasn't too late, that he could make the right decision and ensure his daughter was fine. About the author. Mark Leslie is a writer, editor, and bookseller who was born and grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, spent many years in Ottawa and Hamilton, and currently lives in southern Ontario. Apart from the more than 20 books he has published, Mark is a bookselling veteran who's worked in the industry for more than 25 years. He's worked at virtually every type of bookstore and has given talks across Canada, in the United States, in London, Paris, and Frankfurt on the bookselling, writing, and publishing industry. But Mark is most at home, sharing scary stories in a darkened room or around a roaring campfire. You can learn more about Mark and sign up for his newsletter at markleslie.ca.